Welcome to this latest Innovation at Work webinar series event. Today, I am joined by Stephen Spear, who is a senior lecturer in system dynamics at the MIT Sloan School of Management. Now, Steve has been working for many years on questions about how some organizations, particularly businesses, but other kinds of organizations as well, really managed to get extraordinary performance that many others who try to emulate those gains don't manage to do. And Steve has been studying this for decades and has a lot of great expertise that he publishes in books and other places, that he addresses in numerous executive education and other programs here at the MIT Sloan School, and that he puts into practice with the many organizations that he has worked with over the years, especially in sectors like healthcare and government and defense, but more broadly in all kinds of industries and settings as well. So Steve is really a tremendous expert on this topic and has a lot of both experience and wisdom to share with us. And we call this a webinar today, but in reality, we see this as very much a conversation and an interactive session with Steve. I will be leading off the conversation with some hopefully helpful questions to get things going. But we would really like all of you to also engage with us. And I'm sure many of you have read Steve's books or maybe taken his courses with us. So if you've got any questions that you would like Steve to get to during the next hour, then please do put them in the Q&A. And also feel free to add any comments or thoughts in the chat. If you've got questions, put them in the Q&A. If you've got any comments, please do put them in the chat because we love to see that interaction as well. And over the next hour, we're going to be talking about things like what are the best practices for integrating individual effort into what we sometimes call collective or social, Steve calls social circuitry. How, like the many organizations that Steve has studied that do this, can you stay ahead, especially in an increasingly changing world, changes because of technology, but other kinds of changes like markets, geopolitics as well. And with all of the disruption that is happening for all of our organizations and businesses, how can you continue to create value for your customers and for your own organization, and if you're a business, for your shareholders? Once again, I'm sure you've got many other questions that you would like to put to Steve, so please do start those coming. But while you're thinking, maybe, Steve, what we could do is turn to you and let me just ask you from the outset, could you just take us back to what inspired you to study the things that you study, and just describe a little bit, maybe in a minute or two, what the key elements of that work are?
Yeah, Peter, this is great. Thank you so much. I just want to thank everyone for tuning in, all sorts of time zones and hemispheres. I think we have everyone represented here, other than someone from Antarctica. So if there's a penguin who wants to chime in, fantastic. This is awesome and really, really flattering. Peter, to your question about where does this work have its origin, I'd have to say I showed up at MIT and this was the question of the day. And put it in a real vernacular, American industry was saying it's not fair. It is simply not fair. Here we've had this leadership position, certainly post-war, in the 50s and 60s into the 70s, where we were setting the standard for everything in terms of introduction of creation of new markets, introduction of new technology, creation of new models and brands and this and that. And then there was the onslaught from Japan, and it was existential, where once storied American industrial behemoths, RCA, U.S. Steel, Bethlehem Steel, Ford, General Motors, Chrysler, they were facing this onslaught from Japan. And I was one of the many, at the time, young people who were curious as to what the heck is going on, that from the perspective of American employers and with consequence on American communities, why is things so unfair? And and we'll get into the reasons things are unfair, but just to sort of really motivate the conversation. when researchers at MIT, including young graduate students like John Krafcik was doing his master's degree at the time, they started quantifying the degree, and I say it with air quotes, right? It was very fair, which is they were better. They were quantifying the degree of unfairness. They found that on any given day that everything was the same, but for outcomes, and those difference in outcomes were double the productivity, 100 or 1,000-fold differences in initial quality, double, triple, quadruple the speed with which markets could be accessed and new models and brands could be introduced. On any dimensionality that mattered, the differences were extraordinary. Now, the thing is, what I would offer is that, here 2025, with changing markets, changing politics, changing technology, the opportunity to create quote unquote unfair, everything else, but everything is the same, but for outcome, the opportunities are still there. And so the question is, who's going to put themselves on the positive side of unfair versus the negative side?
So you've studied over the years many different businesses and kinds of organizations, but take us back to the start of the journey. Tell us a little bit more about who you studied and what you discovered.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So back in the 80s, I showed up at MIT, and Lester Thoreau, who was the dean of the Sloan School, he made the school's mission beat Japan. And it was sort of very unifying. Figure out what was going on with Japanese leaders. And it turned out it was not everyone. It was a few: Toyota, Honda, Sony, Mitsubishi, et cetera. And I had a chance, again, thanks to an MIT connection. This was Kent Bowen, who had founded the Leaders for Global Operations program, once called Leaders for Manufacturing. And he and I did a study of Toyota. This is when I was a doctoral student at that point. And the thing was about Toyota, they were establishing the standards on quality, productivity, time to market with new technology, with new brands, with new models. And there had been a lot of work around lean manufacturing. Again, a lot of that pioneered at MIT. And the thing was, with all the documentation of what Toyota was doing and all the hospitality Toyota was showing to visitors, including their competitors, there was no second Toyota in terms of being so far out on so many dimensions of competitiveness. And I had a chance to embed on a Toyota team. And again, this probably reflects, an MIT bias. I was looking for the advantages in science and engineering, that they had some secret algorithm. And what I came to appreciate, and what Kent and I came to appreciate, is that when we were immersed in Toyota, we realized that for Toyota, the science and technology was the outcome. And the thing they worried about every single day was the learning dynamic. And when we first started writing about this, we compared BMW at the time. Their tagline was the ultimate driving machine. And we said, well, Toyota, they're trying to create the ultimate learning machine. And what we found is that anytime we started trying to explain Toyota's huge successes in the market, there's always that they saw problems earlier and more often than anybody else. They came to solutions that were better earlier and more often than anybody else, and they were able to sustain and scale the solutions better, faster than anybody else. So that was, back to the origin story, goes back to Toyota and the realization they were competing on how smart they could get and how fast they could get smart, whereas everyone else was competing on something else.
So that was, 40 years ago. What's changed?
Yeah, so everything and nothing in some regards in terms of what's changed. So in terms of what's changed, well, you start thinking about the international political order. Well, that's changed pretty considerably and is in a rapid pace of change. And certainly technology. I remember when I showed up at MIT as a graduate student, we were learning the cutting edge of IT was relational databases. And then, of course, only a few years ago, everyone was worried about machine learning and that kind of thing. And that's all like so yesterday now with all the stuff around AI. Anyway, long and short, everything has changed except for this, is that when enterprises form up, one of the primary reasons they form up is because there's some audacious undertaking that the people who create that organization, that enterprise, that there's some audacious undertaking that they want to embark on, and they can't do it alone. It can only be accomplished through the concerted effort of many, many people across many, many different specialties and disciplines working together towards achieving that audacious goal. And so what hasn't changed is that when society as a whole and segments of society, institutions, enterprises, firms, whatever, set out to accomplish audacious goals, what hasn't changed is people. That it's people ultimately whose needs we're trying to satisfy, and it's people's energies and efforts and talents that we're trying to harmonize, to the phrase you used before, to harmonize into some sort of collective action towards common purpose. And so we can create more opportunities as the world changes, and we can create more tools to use to identify and achieve those, take advantage of those opportunities. But what hasn't changed is people. And it's people working together to create something of value for other people. And that's the commonality across the 30, 40 years we've been at this.
It sounds quite simple when you put it this way, but could you help us understand a little bit more what this looks like on the ground when a company is or an organization is implementing this approach that you have been describing?
Yeah, Peter, this is fantastic. So I appreciate, you mentioned it sounds simple, and I'll actually pick up off of that. So you start thinking about anything we try to do. In the beginning, we have hope and aspiration, right? And at the end, we hope we have some success. And if we're really good, the success is sooner rather than later. But whatever it is, we have the hope and aspiration here, and we have the success at the end. And what separates us from hope to success is lack of understanding. Because what we don't understand is, we may have hope, but we don't really understand the market space we should be exploring. So that's a bunch of problems to be solved. And in that problem space, we don't really understand the problems that are there, where if we have solutions, they'll be valued. We don't understand that. So those are problems to be solved. And then in that gap between hope and success, there's the people who hold those problems, and we don't understand them. And then even if we have complete understanding of them, which we don't, then there's all the questions about what's the configuration of the solutions that will, if we delivered to them, would make them delighted with us, and how do we actually configure and provide those solutions? So when we're here at Hope and Aspiration, everything in between that and success is just ignorance. It's just ignorance, right? It's just a lot of good feeling, but ignorance. And so how do we close the gap between where we are and useful and sufficient knowledge? Is that we see problems and we solve them, very, very quickly. And the faster, better we can do that and close the gap between total ignorance and sufficient understanding, that's the speed to winning. So anyway, your point about it sounds simple. In truth, it is, because you say, well, what distinguishes Toyota from everybody else they've left in the dust? Well, Toyota is really hyper paranoid, energetic about seeing and solving problems. And we start looking at some of the great IT companies today. What's the difference between them and the people they left in the dust? Well, their aggressiveness around seeing and solving problems. Going back a little bit, and we mentioned this in the book, Wiring the Winning Organization. What was the gap between when President Kennedy laid out the aspiration of going to the moon and returning safely by the end of the decade and the actual accomplishment of that? Well, it was ignorance, which was resolved by seeing and solving a lot of problems. So to your point about it, it's simple. That's a real good segue into what makes it hard, is that it's real simple thinking. It's real hard doing. And that becomes the separator between those who succeed and those who don't, is that those who succeed understand that every day they have to go out and try real, real hard to find something they don't understand and resolve it, and then come back the next day and find yet something else. There's no complacency, and that becomes the problem. And in the absence of complacency, there's also limited opportunity for sort of inflated self-gratification, because every day, no matter, if I started here with hope and aspiration and the gap was ignorance, well, let's say, today and tomorrow I close the gap. Well, behind me is understanding. In front of me is still more ignorance, right? So it's hard work. It's simple thinking, but it's hard work. But that's okay, because hard ideas are hard for all of us to comprehend. Simple ideas, even I can comprehend. And that's just a question of, do you have the fortitude? And I would say this more than that, Peter, do you just have an energetic curiosity? You keep saying, oh, well, this is what I know, but that's no longer interesting to me. I know that, but this is the stuff I don't understand. I wonder what's there. I wonder what's there. And that's the winning sort of very positive energy.
To really drill further into this, we've got a question from Mahesh Tampi about it. In a little while, I'd like to move beyond the manufacturing industries that this work perhaps started in. But for now, Mahesh's question is, even after several decades of lean being introduced, and that's really, I think, in the context of manufacturing, many companies are still struggling with implementing even lean. Why is that?
Yeah, so it is a great question. And if I had better set up my props, I'd pull Taiichi Ono's book off the shelf here about Toyota Production System. And I think the phrase implement lean is the problem, because what ended up happening is when lean was first identified, and what was lean? It was this guy, John Krafcik, who was a curious, energetically curious master's student who said, what the heck is going on that some of these plants are destroying all these others? And he went and he quantified and he said, wow, look at that on any given day, of all the assembly plants in the world, of which there were 186, there were 5. And this guy, John Krafcik, said, of those 5 on any given day, in half the physical space, with half the people, half the capital equipment, their output is double. It was more than that, half in, twice out. It was half in, twice out of much, much better output. And John said, well, how do you label this thing? If everyone else is doing, and this is where he came up with the term lean, he said, if everyone else is doing mass production, massive by the size of the facilities, massive by the amount of inventory on hand, massive by the amount of capital equipment, massive by the headcount, and these are half of everything. Well, if that's massive, he said, this must be lean manufacturing, a lean production. Now, anyway, what happened, lost in translation, is that after that, there was documentation about some of the tools and practices inside some of these facilities that were able to be lean. Again, lean as the outcome, right? And people mistook those tools for the core. And I think, Peter, that's where it, and to the great question, this is where it gets lost, and it ties back to the question of simplicity. At Toyota, the simplicity is the energetic curiosity to aggressively seek out problems, find broken things, and then construct solutions, fix broken things, and just run that recursive loop over and over and over again. And where the lean, quote unquote, lean implementations have failed is that people think, oh, this is a checklist. If I install more tools, I will be leaner. It's like, no, it's change attitudes and behaviors and get better outcomes.
That's a very interesting concept. It sounds like one thing you're describing is that many of us perhaps view something like lean as being a state, a condition that we're in, but in fact, what you're saying is really it's the process, not
That's right.
representation of the process that's crucial.
Yeah, 100%. And just tying this to your point about bringing this fast forward, you start thinking about what Toyota accomplished, and they said, the way to get ahead of everyone is having a much better understanding of what to do, why to do it, for whom to do it, and how to get it done well. And they said, well, and when they started this journey at Toyota, they said, well, we have a worse understanding of what to do, how to do it, for whom, why, and how. And they said, well, how do we close the gap between a really bad understanding, and they were terrible in the 50s and 60s, how do we close the gap between a really bad understanding and the best understanding? This is through learning. It's through seeing and solving problems. Then you start thinking about the stuff that was so current in the IT world over the last bunch of years. And again, you run into this problem, Peter, right? So like in the IT world, there was Agile was the big thing, right? And then DevOps was the big thing. And I'm willing to bet that if someone did a survey in the IT world, they'd say, oh, look at all these attempts to do Agile implementation or all these attempts to do DevOps implementation, but no one's really good at it, except for the few who were good in the beginning. And here's what I'll offer, is when we look at the IT stuff, those practices were originally initiated to make it easier to solve hard problems together. Full stop on that. So when you look at Agile and this whole idea of minimally viable product, what was the point? The point was that if I showed up and sat off in my own little cloister over here and, closed the walls and and then at the end of the day said, hey, Peter, here's my solution to your problem, you'd say, one, you didn't even understand my problem. I'm not the one who even has it. It's that person over there, and that's a crappy ass solution. And then and the IT people got really frustrated with that, and then they realized, you know what? Trying to guess and come up with this huge answer at the end, that's not working for us. So they said instead, hey, Peter, you know what? I'm going to go with this. This is my best guess about your problem, and my best guess about your solution. And here's what I'm asking you to do. Tell me what's wrong. Tell me what I got wrong. And then you tell me what's wrong with my first best guess, and it's great. And then I come back and say, hey, Peter, hey, I got another guess. And I got another guess after that, right? And eventually, if I do enough guessing where you keep telling me what's wrong, eventually I might get to the whole thing being right, but not on the first try. So anyway, where did Agile come in? Agile came in with the realization that if you want to solve really hard problems, way better to simplify your situation. And that's a mechanism we talk about in the book and in the courses we teach about high velocity organizations and whatnot. But simplification, let's just take our best guess, go from 0 to like 0.0 plus and take a best guess and find out what's wrong. We find a problem that way. And then let's take another best guess. But here, where does this fail? Is that you have organizations which think that minimally viable product is actually a solution, as opposed to the invitation to find out how stupid you are. And that the reason you're sprinting is, I don't know why you're sprinting, but really in Agile, as it was originally meant, it was come up with the smallest thing where you could find out how you're wrong, and then sprint, rush to find out, because you want to get that feedback quicker. And this whole notion of huddles, why huddles? It's a good visualization of, well, we're not going to go off to a conference and sit down and get comfortable. Once we found out we were wrong, let's use that feedback very, very quickly. So anyway, the IT world, I think, runs also the same risk. And the same thing with DevOps, and I won't go as much into detail, but the DevOps came out of, Peter's working over here, and Eric's working over here, and Steve's working over here, and everyone's working over here and there on their own. And Charlotte and Elaine are off in their own place. And then somehow magically the pieces are supposed to come together, and it never happened. And the DevOps people were like, oh, crap, this is terrible, working in all our functional silos, and we're only having the conversation at the end. And I'm going to say this with some facetiousness, so then they had this real difficult realization, is that we got to work together. And so that's where the acronym comes from, or the shortening, DevOps, that the development people have to be in conversation early and often with the operating people, and the operating people have to be in conversation with the users and the installers and the maintainers. They have to be in conversation with each other. And what's the basis of the platform of the conversation? It's the Agile. It's like, hey, I have an idea. Quick, everybody else, tell me what's wrong with the idea. So if I'm a developer, I find out from the operator what they dislike, or the user what they dislike, or from the installer what they dislike, the maintainer they dislike. But what's the point is to make problems more evident, more early, more often, so we can solve problems quicker and easier. So anyway, and I'll stop there. But Peter, what I was doing was segueing from, manufacturing to more contemporary sectors, and the commonality here. And why things like Lean and Agile and DevOps fail is because the segue, it comes back to people trying to work together to solve hard problems. And where's the failure is that the initiators of these great ideas, they create artifacts, they create tools that make it easy, but people copy the tools, they don't copy the behaviors. And that's the failure mode.
That seems like a really crucial difference that you've identified there. And as you just said, you started with manufacturing, and then you sort of have talked about sort of IT as a kind of sector, as an industry. A lot of your own work has been in non-manufacturing kind of settings now as well, with government, with healthcare. And Keith McClung was asking earlier, in addition to manufacturing, maybe the application in manufacturing is clearer to people, but can you describe a little bit how this shows up for you in service kind of settings of different kinds, whether it's service industry specifically or more broadly?
Yeah, Peter, it's a fantastic question. So I'm going to make the connection between hard industrial setting and then into soft service one real quick. I've been doing a lot of work the last bunch of years with folks who work in the Navy shipyards where they repair broken warships. And that is a capital intensive environment. And I will make the switch to healthcare in a second. We've been trying to reduce the time it takes to get a submarine from when it enters a dry dock to it leaves a dry dock, because while it's in dry dock, it has no value to anybody. It's actually just sort of it's actually a pain because you got to take care of it. It's like a white elephant of a pet. And there were a lot of efforts around scheduling and budgeting and all sorts of things that go back to a very sort of command control accounting mindset, something which I think actually we can put roots on Harvard Business School and not MIT Sloan. But we're very human centric at MIT Sloan. But anyway, none of that worked. And the reason it didn't work is because fundamentally repairing a submarine is nothing but problem solving. And now it turns out problem solving in a very hazardous environment because the work is dangerous. And so what's worked better is to work real hard to reduce the confusion mechanics find themselves facing when they try to do these hard technical jobs of repairing broken things. And by reducing the confusion that's imposed by the system and by the larger environment, they can take their uniquely qualified intellect and put it on diagnosing things that are busted, repairing things that are busted, and replacing things that are busted. And Peter, that of course is the segue into where we did we had some great successes in healthcare. Because fundamentally, what is healthcare work? It's solving problems and solving really hard problems. And that's why you need doctors of different types and nurses of different types and technicians of different types and administration of different types and on and on and on. You need all these people involved in some fashion to get a good outcome. And I'll just give an example for people, because everyone's saying, oh, well, that might be true for, I don't know, neurosurgery or brain surgery. But let me give you an example. My colleagues and I are doing work with a hospital. Problem in a hospital is discharge. If you can get patients discharged on time every day, you create capacity for new people who are needing care to get into the hospital. If your discharges are late, then you block things up and delay care and deny care. It's a terrible thing. Well, anyway, we started looking at discharge. Take a guess. I'll give people, if you want to, I'm going to give you 10 seconds to type into the chat. How many different functions are involved in a routine discharge in a typical hospital? And we're not talking like anything crazy. Just put a number in there. How many different functions? All right. This is great. This is great. So I just want to show people the bias. The bias is way low. I mean, someone threw in 100. And they probably said, well, it can't be more than 100. I think 50 is there. But the number 23 is the closest of these. And Peter, I just want to put off is like very often we think about things. We say, well, how hard can it be? And anytime we say, how hard can it be? You know what that's an indicator of? We just don't know. It turns out everything is hard. And so anyone who guessed 5 and 8 and 10 and even 12, that's very sympathetic to healthcare. Turns out 24 is the number. 24 different, because you got to figure out transportation, relocation, transition of care, continuity of care, medication, reconciliation with pharmacies and care providers, this and that, approvals and tech, 24. Now, anyway, you start thinking about all that's involved in getting 24 people, individuals who have other responsibilities, not to that one patient, but other patients as well, to get their efforts to align. There was so much in the system to cause confusion. And so what my colleagues were doing was helping people map out how work flow. They revised it from 23 to 24. That's good, Jamal. They mapped out all the different nodes of work that had to come together. And then they started mapping out all the interconnections. And this is why we call this idea of wiring and wiring to win. They had nodes, but the thing is the nodes were all in isolation. They were all firing at arbitrary times. And so getting a patient discharged could take hours and hours beyond what was expected. And then what they did is they started reducing confusion. They said, well, this node is actually dependent on this node. So let's make sure they sequence right. And then we've worked on the interface, the connection between one and the other. And then this node over here feeds this one over here. So let's make sure that they're aligned properly in time and space and sequence, and that the handoff is well-handed. Now, anyway, Peter, that was an example of discharge, which everyone thought was simple, but it's complex. You start thinking about the complex sides of healthcare, which is treating an inpatient who's in intensive care, who's getting multiple tests and treatments and monitoring throughout a day, or someone with a chronic condition that has to be managed over an extended period in different locations. The complexity is off the charts. And so what's the commonality across all these realms is looking at the point of work, the person who's actually creating value, and ask the question, in this moment, what is the source of confusion for Elaine? What is the source of confusion for Peter? What's the source of confusion for Eric or Daniel or Maria or James or whomever else? And say, what is it about how we've wired the system currently that this confusion is escaping and they're experiencing it? And what can we do to reduce confusion at the point of work? And why? So that their genius, their intelligence, their creativity can be applied to solving real problems for which the solution has value, rather than just reducing the confusion we're imposing on them.
That's a really good example. Thank you. And we're getting a lot of questions coming in, but just sticking on this theme of what are people actually doing differently in the companies and organizations that are operating well? And in particular, what is the role of, I think you've talked a little bit about leadership, at least indirectly, but what is it that managers are doing that are different in the
Yeah,
organizations that you studied?
yeah, great question, Peter. So, the typical notion of what is leadership is that somehow I have responsibility for everything, and then because there's so much responsibility, what I do is partition it out, and that's how we draw organizational charts, right? There's the head, and then because there's so much work, that the head, shares stuff around, and then that person subdivides, and it even gets into our lexicon, which I think is like really offensive, right? Because then we talk about the people at the bottom of the organization, right? There's another thing about the people at the bottom of the organization are actually the only ones who touch data, touch information, touch product, and change it and transform it in such a way that anyone cares. Everyone else here is doing nothing that people on the outside of the organization care about. They're I say this facetiously, they have a key role. They're overhead. The people at the bottom of the organization, they're actually the ones creating value. So what happens in the winning organizations? A complete reconception of who's the top and who's the bottom. We were in a facility, and when we were talking to the person who was president of this site, 10,000 people every day. And every time someone asked him a question, he'd give an answer about this thing or that thing. But when the question was about leadership, every time he said leadership, he said, well, what our team leaders do, what our group leaders do, what our area leaders do. And what I was like, and it was like, what is with that tick? Every time every time the word leader came, it was like, boom. It was like, you're thinking, what did you want to play poker with this guy? Because he had such a tell. And then we realized when he was talking about responsibilities within the organization, he had in his mind that the people doing work, mechanics, engineers, technicians, on, and in the hospital setting, the nurses, doctors, pharmacists, orderlies, technicians, whatever it is, they're the ones who are doing something that are turning inputs and converting them and transforming them into outputs that someone wants and values. And everyone else, they're there to support. And what's the nature of this support? It was really two. One was look at the conditions over which they had responsibility, influence, and ask the question, are those conditions as low in their confusion as possible? So the people for whom I'm responsible, the people I support, so they can apply their ingenuity onto solving real problems rather than just figuring out the chaos around them. So that's one thing. And then the second responsibility was continue to build the capabilities of the people for whom they're responsible to see and solve hard problems. That's it. Full stop. Now, you start getting into that, and Peter gets back to what you were saying early on about this sounds so simple. It is, but the behaviors are really hard. They're really hard because it requires us to think that as I advance in an organization, I become more and more subordinate to other people in terms of being responsible for the conditions they encounter. As I advance in an organization, I become more and more subordinate to other people in terms of being the coach and modeler and teacher and developer of their capabilities. It becomes hard, right? So, anyway, it's hard work. But the nice thing is, those who undertake this work, the hard work and simple thinking, again, they win and win big, and they win all the time.
This sounds kind of paradoxical though, Steve, because on the one hand, and Sylvie Bouchard asks, is this about empowering people and reducing governance and helping sort of speed up organizations. But on the other hand, we're talking about, in many cases, very large organizations which deploy enormous amounts of capital and huge long-term investments and so forth. And so there's got to be some degree of, you use the word leadership, but somebody who's making the decisions that lead to an organization that exists and operates in the way that you're describing. So how do you solve that paradox?
Yeah, look, Peter, it's an absolutely great question, right? So there are certain things someone with authority, responsibility can do which others cannot. So, for example, the decision to go to the moon in the 60s, the president and Congress had to make that decision because it was hugely expensive. The decision to launch a new model of a car, that's a huge decision. The decision to go in one direction or another direction in terms of AI, right? There's not one direction, and you can't do them all. There are decisions that have to be made based on the best evidence we have in front of us as to where we're going to go. And it's people with responsibility and authority who can make those decisions. That said, the term empowerment, I think, is another throwaway term that those not at the MIT Sloan School of Management have invented as a way for senior leaders to push away their true responsibilities. Oh, I'm going to empower the workforce. And it's the point you were just making. It's like some of these undertakings are massive. I forget the exact number of organizations involved in the mission to the moon, but it was thousands and thousands of enterprises alone. And the number of people involved was hundreds of thousands of people, each of whom had a unique and valuable contribution to Neil Armstrong being able to say in July 69, the Eagle has landed, and a few days after that, have the crew return safely to Earth. Hundreds of thousands of people. Now, if you went ahead and did this, we're going to empower people empower people at the bottom of the organization. Again, sarcasm around all those phrases. If you said that, what you'd end up with is people making all these local decisions, but the pieces not coming together. And what we see in these great organizations, again, with this one where leadership is thought of this way in support, is that if my job is to support 5 people, then my job is to make sure that I've got good integration amongst the efforts of those 5. If my job is to support 5 teams, then I have to worry about the integration across those 5 teams into a larger whole. If I support 5 groups into an area, my job is to make sure that there's good integration of those 5 efforts into the larger undertaking of the area, and then the zone and the division, the department, largely, and eventually the enterprise. So there is a critical role for those, and again, for those senior people, because they have a breadth and span of responsibility and authority, which someone at the point of work doesn't. Nevertheless, the job of those senior people is not only to then pick the direction in which the enterprise is going, but then create the conditions in which the people at the point of work can solve really hard problems to make sure we're pointed in the right direction and getting there better, quicker, safer than we would otherwise.
Great, that's helpful. Thanks. And Emilio Almeida asked a very related question. What needs to be developed or changed or improved in the current leadership approach in order to implement these kinds of transformations?
Yeah, so it's fantastic. So I was just reflecting on an article written by a guy named John Shook in Sloan Management Review in about 2010. And John was writing an article about culture change. And again, I apologize to folks about coming back to the Toyota references. That's where this article is rooted. But I hope I've persuaded people at least enough, or at least open their minds to the idea that the issue here is people and not machines and tools and stuff. So John was talking about an experience he was part of where there was conversion of an auto plant from arguably the worst in the country to the best in the country. And the conversion happened in about a year. Worst to first in about a year. And to give you a sense of things, this plant had about 3,000 people, about $1 billion worth of capital equipment. It's a fairly complex undertaking in a complex situation. And when John was explaining how they did that, he said, look, this is not a bunch of leaders saying, oh, we're going to change culture and then have classes on how to change thinking. And then, oh, poof, miraculously, everyone's behavior changes. John said it was exactly the opposite. You had to change doing first. You had to have leaders show up at the point of work, and I'm paraphrasing on John now, so it's more universal in application, and show up at the point of work, whether that work was of a mechanic, an associate, an engineer, a technician, anyone in the STEMs, it doesn't matter. And ask the question, right here, right now, when we're asking you to do something, what is confusing? And Peter, I want to separate that, because whether it's fixing something sophisticated on a broken submarine or diagnosing a patient who's in the hospital and in the hospital because they couldn't be diagnosed outside the hospital, there's the confusion of the scientific or the engineering problem in front of the person. And that's exactly where we want people's creativity and ingenuity to be applied, whether it's individually or collectively. It's on that thing which we don't understand. The confusion John was talking about was all the other stuff. Where do I get my information? Where do I get my support? Where do I get to my technical direction? Where do I get equipment, parts, materials, this thing and that thing? Get rid of all this confusion, so now I can focus my actual intelligence on, and again, people mention AI, and I'm going to come back to that in a second. But why am I focusing my attention? Because there's a situation right here where we don't have an answer. And the only way we'll have an answer is if creative people apply their ingenuity to generate an answer for the very first time. And so that's the change, is for this facility or anywhere else we've had experience, is get leaders to change their behavior, change their doing. And through their doing, they show a different way of thinking. And when that different way of doing and thinking spreads wide enough, then we can say, aha, we've had a change in culture.
Sticking with the car manufacturing industry, or going back to it, one of the questions, and I'm just scrolling through to find the name of the person, but let me ask it in the meantime, was if you look at the company BYD, well known now, a Chinese company that seems to be doing some very significant work and making big inroads into manufacturing, particularly around electric vehicles. Is this the same playbook that you're seeing being used? I don't know whether you've studied the company or had an opportunity yet, but or is there some other paradigm unfolding here?
Yeah. So as far as winners and losers, look, people may say, and I can't speak to trade policy, this and that, is like, oh, maybe there's unfair subsidies or regulation and rules and whatever else it is for BYD. It might be. People used to make the same accusations about Honda and Toyota. Turned out there weren't. That wasn't the point. So let's give BYD the benefit of the doubt for a second, and say, well, if they've managed to come from behind and race ahead in terms of delivering a better product at lower cost with more reliability, what does that imply? It implies that within that organization, that the problems that are still plaguing other people, in terms of effective use of scarce materials, in terms of battery storage, et cetera, they have figured out how to solutions to those problems better, faster than anybody else. See, Peter, here's the thing about level playing fields. It's the only explanation left, right? So it's not just an empirical thing like, oh, Steve went and immersed at Toyota, but what does he know about this other place, right? Or he went immersed at Alcoa or in these hostels, which is true, right? What does he know? It's more than an empirical argument. It's a logical argument. If you and I are competing and we start off at the same starting line and we look around and it's like the rules of the race are the same. Okay, well, you can't win on rules. And we look at the available raw materials and capital equipment that you can get and I can get, and that's the same. All right, well, you're not winning on that. And we look at the finish line. It's the same finish line. We're trying to get to the same market and meet the same needs. You can't win on that. The only way you can win is if you can run faster. That's it. It's the only explanation left. You cannot cheat, right? And we put it aside the performance enhancing drugs. Either we're not using them, we're both using them in equal quantity, whatever. But the only thing is that you ran faster and got to the finish line first. Now, again, back to competition. What's the distance that has to be covered? It's all the problems. Instead of meters and yards, it's problems, right? And if we start here with hope and aspirations, which are moderate, maybe the finish line is closer. If we start here and our hopes and aspirations are really ambitious, like go to the moon or cure cancer or whatever else, then there are more problems. That's the distance of the race. So anyway, the thing is, if you run the race faster and get to the finish line first, it's because you're solving problems better than I am. It's the only explanation left. Both that's the support of the empirical evidence and also the logic by process of elimination. That's all that's left.
Great, thank you. So you make a very compelling pitch that the difference that these winners all have is something about recognizing that the role of human beings and humanity in these organizations. And so the elephant in the room question now in every conversation is, So how is AI and what that might portend likely
Right.
to change the analysis that you've done here?
Yeah. So I'll make another couple of references to MIT stuff. And first, let me just say, look, I'm not an AI expert on the technology, and I've started to become, I wouldn't say a power user, but a very active user, but in a very narrow realm. But I think it's illustrative, right? Where have I used AI is to help me with writing. I do a lot of writing, and I think I'm not bad at it, but where am I using the AI to help me? I use it as a tool. I use it as a tool if I need a reference. Sometimes it'll help me find a reference I couldn't have found on my own. If I need help with editing, it'll help me with editing. And it is very good. It's very conversational, this thing. I'll put something in, I'll say, tell me what's wrong. Again, this problem-seeking behavior, and it will tell me what's wrong. But here's the thing about AI, right? All of its intelligence is dependent on its read stuff that already exists. It's read stuff that's already exists. And the thing about trying to win this race where Peter and Steve are starting at the same starting point of ignorance, and we're trying to reach a point of adequate understanding. AI doesn't know what doesn't exist yet. Only Peter and Steve can figure out stuff using tools, whether it's AI to expand our ability to process information, or machine learning for quantitative, data of that type, or just a lever, to move something heavy. We're uniquely qualified to see and solve new problems for which the machines don't yet have a solution. That's one thing. And now, making reference to MIT. So some researchers at MIT, you can help me out with the names. They came up with this acronym called EPIC. And they said, what are the things that people can do which the machines can't do? So what can the machines do? Our colleague Michael Schrage says, look, machines, they're wicked good. They got enormous memory, way beyond it, all of collective humanity. And they're really good at finding patterns and structures in even unstructured data, way beyond what we can do. But what can't they do? And this is the epic thing, is they can't empathize. A machine cannot look at a situation and say, you know what? I know how you feel. I know how you feel. And if it can't do that, then it can't really fully, it can close the gap on, but it can't completely fully understand the problem we're trying to solve. It can't completely fully understand the nature of the solution we're trying to, it can help approximate. We can get that. And how can it approximate? It can draw on these huge repositories of what's already known. It can approximate, but it can't close the gap to full understanding. And that's where the people come in. Peter, it reminds me, in our first book, The High Velocity Edge, we have a chapter on knowledge sharing. We open up drawing upon the book Guns, Germs, and Steel. And the paradox that that book opens up with is, how was a few Spanish conquistadors, I think it was a few of them, able to defeat the Incan army of 80,000 men? And they said, well, they showed up, it was just a few bodies, but they showed up with the collective wisdom of all of Europe, because Europe had there'd been the invention, adoption, and spread of printing. And so they were talking about these conquistadors. And when they got to the Americas, they showed up with the wisdom that was acquired by the hundreds and the thousands of people who previously had domesticated horses and forged steel and come up with infantry tactics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that was the edge. And now I'm thinking out loud about this. So what does AI do here? Is that it does that, but faster and more. But again, the conquistadors, when they got to the Andes, what did they do? They had an approximation of how to succeed. And I'm not justifying what they did. Let's not go there. But they had an approximation of how to succeed at what they set out to do. But at the end of the day, they had to close the gap. They had to build, because it was that last little bit which had never been seen before. So anyway, as far as AI, it can give us approximations, but that last little gap of what's new, that's where we come in.
It sounds like that you're applying the same way of thinking, the same framework to this latest technology capability and that we're talking about here, and still putting it back in terms of as people and as organizations, how do we learn, how do we change, how do we adapt? So, in the last few minutes, what are some key takeaways that people that hearing this and really want to move themselves and their organization in the direction that you would advocate? What are some of the things that they can or should be or could be doing?
Yeah. So, Peter, thank you. The thing I would advocate is every day when your feet hit the floor, say, today my commitment is I'm going to be energetically and humbly curious. That's what I'm going to do. And if I'm responsible for the conditions other people encounter when they show up on the job, what I'm going to do is when I get there, I'm going to make sure that they want to be and can be as energetically and humbly curious as possible. And I'm going to make sure that when we talk about what we accomplished today is what we discovered. I'll give you an example. I was working, and again, out of the manufacturer, I was working with a pharma company for a while, and we were trying to compress the time it takes to develop a drug. And we managed to. There was a phase that took well over a year, and we got it down to about 6 months, doing some of the things we're talking about. But to the point that people aren't socialized enough to, my job today is to be energetically, humbly, joyfully curious and measure my day by what I discovered. Turned out this facility, people got home on the train. And to get to the train, there was a shuttle. And so one day we did a controlled experiment because people say, oh, of course, we're all curious. That's what we do here. So we started at the front of the line by the door to the shuttle. And so sort of to get on the shuttle, you had to answer the question. The question was, what did you accomplish today? And wouldn't you know, first person who got on the bus says, oh man, great day. Let me tell you how many lines of code I wrote. Next person who got on the bus said, oh, great day. Let me tell you how many tests I ran in my laboratory. Next person, let me tell you how many reports I was able to write and distribute to people. Next person, let me tell you how many compounds I synthesized. Next person, blah, 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 blah. Everyone had an answer that was literally or figuratively physical output. Like, how many widgets did I produce today? And the whole point of this organization, with all the PhDs in there and all the equipment, it wasn't to make anything at all other than better understanding. No one, and I'm going to say no one, got on the bus saying, oh, what a great day. I showed up today so ignorant about this thing, and I have a better understanding. And guess what? I told my friends the knowledge multiplication thing. So anyway, back to what should people do is commit every day to having that very positive attribute of energetic, joyful curiosity. And if you're responsible for other people, formally or informally, infect them with that and make it possible for them to express that, also that energetic, joyful curiosity. And if you do that, you'll be able to see and solve problems much faster. You'll have fun doing it, and you'll be able to arrive at solutions which other people value and reward you for better, quicker, faster than anybody else.
So, Steve, if I were a cynic or a critic, I might say that's all very well, but that's not how I measured. That's not how I am rewarded in my own company, or even how my company is rewarded in any sort of meaningful near-term way. So how do you address that?
Yeah, Peter, that's a fantastic question. Probably the one we'll end up with, which is, a lot of time the people I focus with aren't the people at the top of the organization, it's people somewhere in the middle, and say, oh man, I'd like to do that, but for. And you know what the but for is? You're getting measured, and again, it's arbitrary measurement sometimes, by folks who want performance, but they don't understand the way to achieve performance is by aggressively swarming onto problem, solving them, and then keep moving the needle. But here's the thing, they care about where the needle is. So if you have whatever your area of responsibility is, and they ask you where the needle is all the time about that, then they don't have to know that the way you're moving the needle is by being energetically and joyfully curious. And they don't know, they don't know that the way you're moving the needle is by creating the opportunity for the people for whom you're responsible to be energetically and joyfully curious. And Peter, this is not hypothetical. When we've done work in organizations, very big organizations, we've always started someplace small. When we started Alcoa, it was a single production cell at a single extrusion plant in Davenport, Iowa. When we started in hospitals, it was a single nursing unit. The stuff we're doing in shipyards now, we started with a single mechanic, one mechanic named Emery. And what did we do? We didn't tell anyone what we were doing, other than being, but what we did was we allowed people the opportunity to be joyfully, energetically curious, to remove the confusion which surrounded the hard, difficult, dangerous work of mills and plants and hospitals and shipyards. And then when the needle moved, and then senior people who were tracking reds and greens and this thing and that thing, they said, how'd you do that? And we told them. So anyway, That's where I would go with that. Is you don't have to tell people how you're moving the needle so long as you are. And evidence says, whether it's empirical or, just by a process of elimination, this is the way to move the needle very far, very fast, better than anybody else.
Thank you, Stephen. On that note, I'm just looking at the time and see we're almost out. I want to thank everyone who's been asking questions. I'm sorry we didn't have time to get to all of them, but perhaps, Steve, I can also, in these last couple of minutes, invite you to just share a little bit. So, we've just spent an hour together talking about this topic, but in your courses, you spend days or even weeks in the online courses helping people work their way through these ideas and sort of their practical application. What should someone expect the experience of being in one of your courses talking about these topics would
Yeah,
be?
Peter, that's great. So whether we're in person, online, live, or asynchronous, and I'll mention that because it's something real genius you and your colleagues have invented. We take these simple ideas. That's what we do at MIT. We like simple ideas and we like application. It's minds through hands. And so in the course, what we'll do is we'll have some period of, hey, here's an idea, here's an example, but then we'll get into the application. And if it's in the classroom with other people, we'll try to apply those ideas into a situation that you're having in your own organization and compare notes. That's the cross fertilization with your colleagues. When we're doing this live online, same thing. We use very, very, I think, adroit use of Zoom and breakouts and this thing and that thing. Here's an idea. Here's an example. But then let's really wrestle. Simple idea, but it's going to be hard work. So how do you put those ideas into practice where you go? And then the same thing with the asynchronous. I just want to give a plug. So most people think about asynchronous like, oh, I go online and just press buttons. But that's not the case with the Sloan asynchronous. What it is there's the module where you get the ideas. There's the module where you get the exercises. But then there's the TA sessions where you get the conversation too. And the cross-fertilization, the opportunity for feedback. So, yeah, it would be like this, but we take it more in, outside the hour. We'd have opportunity to take these ideas and have people really wrestle with how it applies in the responsibilities that they have.
Great. Well, thank you very much again, Steve, for spending this hour with us. It's been fascinating. And I've learned a lot. I hope everyone else has learned something that will be useful as well. And all of us are a little bit more curious than we were at the beginning of this hour. So thank you once more, Steve. Thank you to everyone from all around the world who has not only been listening, but putting great questions in the chat and in the Q&A, which has really helped me to keep asking what might seem like smart questions. They all came from you, which I think is part of the secret here. So thank you, everyone. Congratulations, Steve, on the book and on the classes that you've been running at MIT Sloan and all of the important work that you're doing out in the world to help organizations and leadership to be improved. With that, it's time to say goodbye, and I hope I'll see many of you again on future webinars or at classes here at MIT Sloan Executive Education. Thank you very much, Steve Spear.
Absolutely. Thank you all.